Hi, everyone. My name is Taylor St. Germain. I'm an analyst at ITR Economics, and thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Trends Talk. Today, I wanted to discuss the U.S. national debt. We've received a lot of questions about the national debt, especially with the passing through of numerous stimulus bills throughout this last year, as well as the proposed infrastructure bill. Currently, at this point in time, the time of this recording, our debt to GDP ratio is 134.5% here in the United States. What I mean by that is our government debt is currently 134.5% of our GDP. The reason that number is significant is that it is a new record high. If you look back to the last time we saw a peak in the debt to GDP ratio at a similar level, it was World War II, and we came in just below 130% throughout that time. So I think that's a big reason why this conversation is coming back up, because the US is now at a record debt to GDP ratio. But the question is, should we be concerned about this in the near term? In my answer to you is no, this is not a near-term concern, especially with the low interest rate and relatively low inflationary environment when we look at the long run. And you've probably heard similar sentiment from our Federal Reserve in the various governors and chairmen, in the chairman for the Federal Reserve, that even though we have a much higher level of U.S. debt, because interest payments are low, we can afford that minimum interest payment on the U.S. debt, and we're not concerned about the trajectory of the U.S. economy, at least in the near term. Where this comes to fruition for us in terms of a downside as it relates to the public debt is as we look out to the 2029 and 2030 timeframe. Depending on your familiarity with ITR economics, you're probably aware of a 2029-2030 economic downturn. Our president and CEO wrote a book called Prosperity in the Age of Decline, all about this economic recession, depression even, that we're expecting in 2029-2030. And that's where the level of debt becomes concerning for all of us at ITR Economics. It's not in the near term, it's in the longer term. And some of the reasons for that are we expect a much higher inflationary environment when we look at particularly the second half of this decade as we get closer to that 2029, 2030 timeframe. Demographic trends play a key factor there. When we think about the size of the baby boomer generation, the Social Security payouts, the healthcare costs, as those baby boomers continue to get older and move into those later years of their lives, we see much higher levels of inflation coming our way, which of course translates to higher interest rates. And the Federal Reserve has already hinted at that with their longer run interest rate projection, with rates being much higher in that 5 to 10 year future than where they are right now. So the level of debt is concerning, but it's not going to trigger some economic catastrophe, at least here in the near term from our perspective. It continues to remain a long-term perspective. So there's still a lot of growth to take advantage of over these next 5 years. And yes, will the debt situation continue to get worse in terms of our debt to GDP ratio or our federal debt per capita? Yes, we do expect to see the debt climb. But remember, the variable is that inflation piece. Once we see higher inflation, much higher than where we're at right now, then we'll start to see that interest rate rise, and that's what makes those interest payments on the federal debt become more concerning. And again, one part of that puzzle that leads to the 2030 downturn. So I know we all like to talk about national debt. It's certainly a great cocktail conversation, but our concerns are largely mitigated here in the near term. We're still concerned about that 7 to 10 year future as it relates to this level of debt. So don't be afraid of debt. Don't be afraid of the economic outlook as we look out over the first half of the 2020s. There's a lot of growth coming our way, even in the face of higher national debt. Take advantage of this growth. So when debt and inflation do become an issue as we approach 2029 and 2030, we've had plenty of time to prepare and grow and be ready for the downturn that's coming throughout that time. Again, for more information, please read Prosperity in the Age of Decline. Our president and CEO did a great job writing that book. It's a very fascinating read, and I think it's important for all, from a business standpoint, but even a personal standpoint, that we're ready for what comes deeper into the future. More to come on 2030 with ITR Economics, but for now, I'm signing off. I'm Taylor St. Germain, and thanks for joining me on this episode of Trends Talk.